Imagine hearing the word no once. It stings, doesn't it? It makes you question your worth. It makes you want to crawl into a corner and give up. Now, imagine hearing that same brutal word 1,009 times. Imagine driving across a dusty, forgotten American highway, sleeping in the back seat of your rusted car, surviving on scraps of food, and knocking on door after door after door, only to have every single one of them slammed in your face. Most people would quit after 10. The strongest might make it to 50. By 100, society would call you insane for continuing. But this man, he kept going. He was 65 years old, broke, and staring down the barrel of total defeat. Yet, he refused to let the world break him. This is not just a story about fried chicken. This is the harrowing, deeply emotional journey of a man who suffered a lifetime of brutal tragedies, agonizing failures, and systemic rejections before he finally built one of the greatest business empires the world has ever seen. Welcome back to Wealth Blueprint. Today, we are uncovering the untold, heartbreaking, and ultimately triumphant story of Colonel Harland Sanders. To understand the man who changed fast food forever, we have to go back to where the pain began. In 1890, in a tiny, impoverished farming community in Henryville, Indiana, Harland Sanders was born. Life in rural America at the turn of the century was already unforgiving, but for young Harland, it was about to become a living nightmare. When Harland was just 5 years old, tragedy struck the household like a lightning bolt. His father came home from work with a raging fever and collapsed. Within days, he was dead. Suddenly, the world shattered for the Sanders family. His mother, drowning in grief and desperation, had no choice but to take a grueling job at a local tomato canning factory just to keep a roof over their heads. This left 5-year-old Harland with a massive, unfair burden. He was forced to become the caretaker of his younger siblings. While other children his age were playing in the fields and learning to read, Harland was doing the family laundry, chopping firewood, and learning how to cook. By the age of 7, he was already a master in the kitchen, experimenting with herbs and spices to feed his hungry brother and sister. It was a childhood robbed by circumstance, defined by survival. But the tragedy didn't stop there. When his mother eventually remarried, his new stepfather proved to be a cruel, abusive man who despised Harland. The domestic environment became so toxic, so violent, that at the tender age of 13, Harland packed a small cloth bag and ran away from home. He was completely alone in a cold, vast world. What followed was a decades-long saga of relentless failure. Harland Sanders became a drifter, wandering from town to town, taking any backbreaking job that would pay him a few cents. He lied about his age to enlist in the United States Army, serving in Cuba, only to be honorably discharged into a bleak economy. He found work as a blacksmith's helper, then a stoker for the railroads, shoveling heavy coal into roaring train furnaces for hours on end until his muscles burned and his lungs filled with ash. He tried his hand at studying law, practicing through correspondence courses, but a physical fistfight in a courtroom ruined his legal career before it ever truly began. He sold life insurance, he operated a steam ferry boat, he manufactured acetylene lamps. Every time he seemed to find a spark of momentum, the flame was violently extinguished. He was fired from jobs, his business ventures collapsed, and his financial stability was non-existent. By his late 30s, Harland looked in the mirror and saw a man who had tried everything, yet possessed nothing. He was a professional failure. But destiny has a strange way of hiding opportunities inside the darkest corners of our lives. In 1930, at the age of 40, Sanders managed to land a job managing a humble Shell service station in Corbin, Kentucky. It was a lonely stretch of highway, but travelers were always hungry. Remembering the skills he had forged as a traumatized 7-year-old boy cooking for his siblings, Sanders decided to do something different. He didn't have a restaurant, so he fed travelers right out of his own living quarters at the back of the gas station. He served them country ham, steaks, and a dish he had been quietly perfecting for decades: fried chicken. The response was immediate. Word of mouth spread like wildfire down the highway. Travelers didn't just stop for gas anymore. They stopped for the food.
As his popularity grew, Sanders moved his operation across the street to a dedicated 142-seat restaurant. He was finally finding his footing. But he wasn't satisfied. Fried chicken took too long to cook, nearly 30 minutes in an iron skillet. Customers didn't want to wait that long on a road trip. Instead of giving up, Sanders innovated. He took a newly invented device called a pressure cooker and modified it into a pressurized fryer. Then, he spent years obsessively blending a secret combination of ingredients. He combined flour with exactly 11 herbs and spices, locking the formula away in his mind. The result? A piece of chicken that cooked in minutes, locked in the juices, and tasted like absolutely nothing else on earth. His culinary genius caught the attention of the governor of Kentucky, who officially bestowed upon him the honorary title of Kentucky Colonel. At long last, after 40 years of agonizing struggle, Harland Sanders was a success. He was a respected businessman with a thriving restaurant. He believed his hardships were finally over. He was wrong. In the early 1950s, a devastating blow struck. The government announced the construction of a brand new interstate highway, one that completely bypassed Corbin, Kentucky. Virtually overnight, the bustling traffic that fed Sanders' restaurant vanished. The vibrant highway became a ghost town. The customers were gone. The revenue dried up completely. Sanders was forced to auction off his beloved restaurant at a massive loss just to pay off his mounting debts. When the dust settled, Harland Sanders was 65 years old. He was broke. His business was gone. His dream was dead. His only source of income was a meager monthly Social Security check of just $105. Most men at 65 are preparing for a quiet retirement. Most men at 65 look back at their lives with a sense of completion. But Sanders looked at that $105 check and felt a profound sense of anger and betrayal. He knew he had more to give. He knew his recipe was worth something. So he made a radical, desperate decision. With nothing left but his 11 herbs and spices, a pressure cooker, and a faded white suit, the elderly colonel loaded up his old vehicle and hit the American road. His plan was simple, yet wildly ambitious. He would drive from town to town, knock on the doors of independent restaurants, cook his chicken for the owners, and offer them a franchise agreement. He would give them the recipe in exchange for a tiny royalty, just 4 cents for every chicken they sold. But America in the 1950s wasn't interested in an old man's chicken recipe. What followed was a brutal masterclass in psychological torture. Sanders didn't have money for hotels. He slept in the cramped, freezing back seat of his car, using his own coat as a blanket. He washed himself in gas station bathrooms. He lived on pennies a day. He would walk into a restaurant, enthusiastic and proud, only to be laughed out of the building. Restaurant owners told him his white suit looked ridiculous. They told him his idea was stupid. They told him no one would pay for a recipe they could make themselves. One door slammed shut, then 10, then 50, then 100. Can you imagine the mental fortitude required to hear no 500 times while sleeping in a car at age 65 and still waking up the next morning with the enthusiasm to try again. He was rejected 500 times, 800 times, 1,000 times. For over 2 long, agonizing years, Harland Sanders lived a life of constant, unrelenting humiliation. He faced 1,009 brutal rejections, but on the 1,010th door, everything changed. A restaurant owner named Pete Harmon in South Salt Lake, Utah, tasted the chicken. His eyes lit up. He recognized the genius. Harmon shook the Colonel's hand and agreed to the deal. The first official Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise was born. Once the spark was lit, it became an uncontrollable wildfire. Harmon's restaurant saw a massive explosion in sales. Other restaurant owners noticed, and suddenly, the phones started ringing. They didn't reject the Colonel anymore. They begged him for the recipe. By 1964, less than a decade after staring at his $105 Social Security check, Colonel Sanders had expanded Kentucky Fried Chicken to over 600 franchise locations across the United States and Canada. The broke, homeless 65-year-old man had become a multi-millionaire icon. He eventually sold the company for $2 million, an astronomical sum at the time, while remaining the official, beloved face of the brand, earning a massive salary for the rest of his life. Today, KFC is a global empire with over 25,000 restaurants in more than 140 countries, feeding billions of people. And every single bucket of chicken still bears the smiling face of the man who refused to quit. The life of Colonel Sanders leaves us with 3 unforgettable blueprints for success. First, age is an illusion. Society tries to tell us that if you haven't made it by 30 or 40, you've failed. The Colonel proved that you are never too old, and it is never too late to reinvent yourself. Second, your past does not define your future. Sanders suffered childhood abuse, poverty, the loss of a parent, and decades of professional failures. But he used those trials as fuel, not as an excuse. And finally, persistence beats everything. Talent, luck, and intelligence mean nothing if you give up when the world tells you no. The next time you face a setback, the next time a door is slammed in your face, and the next time life tells you that you aren't good enough, remember Colonel Sanders. Remember the 1,009 rejections that built an empire. Because your breakthrough might just be behind door number 1,010. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you, hit that like button, leave a comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe to Wealth Blueprint for more powerful stories behind the world's greatest successes.